Welcome to Motorcycle Transmission 2. I'm your host, Tom Bieler. If you want to know more about me, go to homeagain.com. But right now we're talking about Mr. Matt Zimmerman. Hey, Matt, thanks for coming on the show with me today, brother.
Of course, let's do this.
I have known Matt for 20 years exactly this year.
Yeah.
And, he's been in it as long as me. And he was one of the people I wanted to have on this season of the podcast. Matt, give me a quick summary of just kind of who you are, what you do for a living and what you offer here at the shop.
I'm Matt Zimmerman. I own Right Side Up Kreations. For the past 15 years here, we've been building motorcycles. Nowadays, it's mostly all tuning and performance work. Anything from converting a street bike to a full tracker race bike, getting street bike performance, getting race bike performance, as well as maintenance and all that stuff. So a lot of ECU flashing, dyno tuning, stuff along those lines.
Yeah, good. So take me back to your first experience with two wheels, whether it was on or off road. What was your first experience as far as that, no matter how young you might have been at the time?
My 8-year-old birthday, walked into the garage, and there was a 1971 Honda Mini Trail in the garage with a happy birthday to me. Thought I wasn't supposed to see it yet. I turned around and my whole family was there, and from there, when I was at school, the whole day we just thought about riding that thing all the time. Me and my buddy would go there. We would spend all of our free time on that. It didn't matter if it was winter, summer. We used to tow the sled behind it, and that's really where it all started.
And you were 8 at the time?
8 years old.
That's probably earlier than a lot of guys get on two wheels. I mean, I know there's like some families that kind of come up in motocross and they're putting the kids on a dirt bike before they can walk, but eight's pretty early.
Yep.
I think I was 20 or 21 when I first got my first street bike. But so you're 8 years old, you got this mini trail, and you're saying you were all talking at school, like your friends and stuff, or you guys were all riding the same bike and taking turns ripping this thing around? Or
it was we lived kind of in the country, and back then, living in the country, you can only see a limited amount of friends because of travel and all that stuff. So it was really me and my one buddy Chris. And it was more me and him. A few other friends would come over, but we always rode my bike until he got one, which took a few years. We'd take turns on it, and
cool.
Yeah.
And that bike's probably long gone by now, or do you still have it somewhere in your collection?
That bike went somewhere I couldn't tell you.
For legal reasons, or just because you can't remember?
I can't remember what happened to it. I think after I started riding other bikes, it was at a buddy's house, and I think it just disappeared. Someone ended up with it, and I lost track of it.
So you rode that trail for most of your childhood?
That was from 8 to 12 or 13 or so. And then it was another older bike that I got. We had a 1972 Suzuki TS 185.
Nice.
And that was my first two-stroke experience. It's actually an enduro bike.
Yeah.
Pulled all the street stuff off of it, and I used to ride the power line trails on Grand Island, and really started from there. Once we moved, and I moved out to the country again. Went up to a CR 125, a newer bike, and that's when I started hitting some motocross tracks and stuff like that.
Okay, so you were doing some riding on motocross tracks. Did you compete at all, or were you just going on like open days where you could just go ride? Or
so it was mostly for fun, but I was looking into doing some competition stuff, and I was 18 years old, and then I got injured falling off a roof at the time, and that pretty much ended all my riding right when I was thinking of getting competitive with it.
Yeah, and falling off a roof, well, that'll do it.
It was 2.5 stories, compound fracture left leg, shattered both my feet, broke a wrist. Yeah, a whole lot of stuff. Lucky I'm still here.
Yeah, that is a lot, man, especially at a young age. I know a lot of old guys that fall off roofs, I guess you're better off falling on a roof at 20 than 40 or 50.
I feel better than falling off a roof nowadays, that's for sure.
Yeah, I hear that, man. So at this point you're hurt, and then your motocross dreams are probably not really on the front burner anymore at this point, right?
Exactly. Doctors told me, I mean, they straight out told me I'd never ride again. I'd never be able to walk on uneven ground, all that stuff. So I was down and out. Took me a few years of being down and out till I got sick of it, and that's when we started getting into street bikes.
Okay.
So I'm probably 22, 23 years old around that time.
Yeah, yeah, and that's probably around the time that we met, maybe a little bit earlier, because you were already had your shop when we first met.
Yes, we met. So I started my shop probably a year and a half, 2 years after street riding, and then we met a year after that.
Yeah. And when you were street riding, what was your first street bike? Like after you got hurt and you were
The
starting to get the itch to be on two wheels again.
first street bike was the one that I own. I still own it to this
It's
day.
the F4i.
Yep.
No.
2004 Honda F4i.
Usually I have people on the show and they're able to tell me a litany of bikes that they've had. And you've had the same one for over 20
I,
years now.
I couldn't name all the bikes I've owned since
No, I
then,
know.
but that one's never left my possession.
Yeah. And
So
it probably would never will.
I've thought about selling it several times,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Let,
I can't bring myself to do it.
So let's go on a little F4i tangent here, just because it is an interesting topic. Because to this day, um, it was a bike that Honda made that was not a super sport bike. It wasn't the 600RR. It was really like the perfect. It was basically the peak of a sport bike for the street.
Yes, it was. So they started the F series from the 90s. It carried from all the way
From
from
the
the
original
original
Hurricane,
F,
yeah.
F2, F3, F4. Then they added fuel injection in 2001.
Yeah.
And then in 2003, they came out with the 600RR. And since then, the F4i, they went back to what everyone calls the banana seat, the one-piece seat.
Right, yeah.
Made it more comfortable for the street. 600RR kind of took on the race bike thing from there. But it was a great street bike. A lot of people stunted him. I did a bit of everything on the bike.
I know, yeah.
It's been a stunt bike. It's been used and abused.
Yeah.
And now it's just a street beater.
So at this point it is a street beater, but yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that was a bike that knew, but you obviously know very well. But I remember you were very comfortable on that bike, and whether we were out riding sporty on the street or whether you were in a parking lot with some guys that were doing wheelies and stuff, you definitely always seemed at home on it. Do you think that do you think the F4i has any direct competitors from any of these other models that kind of are the less super sport bike? So like Suzuki has like GSF models, usually Kawasaki. I don't know if they really have one currently, but you know, is there a better sport bike for the street than the CBR F4i?
I think it was probably one of the best all around bikes as far as for the street being a comfortable sport bike. That's the main thing, being comfort into it. There's a lot of
Yeah,
sport bikes that are great for the street. Specifically, Hondas are always a great all around bike.
yeah,
There's bikes, with more power. There's bikes that are faster, everything. But nowadays, that the generation, the 600RR, still a great street bike.
yeah.
Extremely uncomfortable. That F4i, we would do 200 miles a day, 400 miles a day, 500-mile days, sometimes going
Right.
down to Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
Doing that on a 600RR, even in my 20s, there's no way I'd be able to do
yeah, yeah, yeah. Sport bikes. I mean, so like I always compare it because like I have a bad back as well. I don't think I had one back when we first met, but I've developed one just from old age and retarded decisions. But like when you're sitting up straight on like a bike with like the sit up and bag ergonomics where you're kind of upright, and you hit a bump, like that bump goes right like through like your tailbone into your spine. And when you're on a sport bike and your legs are like behind you and you're kind of like laying down over the tank and stuff like that, there's a lot more like forgiveness, I think, when you hit some of those harder bumps where instead of having this like sharp jolt to like the bottom of your spine, you kind of like absorb it almost kind of like a leaf spring or something, I guess. But
it. Well,
um,
you're always supposed to have your weight on your feet. So
sure.
if you're doing that and you have the core for it, then technically that's taking a lot of the shock for you. But
Yeah,
we all get lazy on the street, so
sure.
the whole
Yeah.
body ends up taking the shock.
Yeah. 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 And street riding is something we can chat about a little bit later. So you decide, okay, I'm hurt. I still want to be on two wheels. I got this F4i now. What made you actually open up your shop to the point where you said, you know what, I want to try to make my career in this?
So at the time, I wasn't doing anything. Again, from following up from the
Sure.
injury,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I was down and out for a while. I mean, time in a wheelchair, time with a walker, all that stuff. Full rehabilitation, and I was looking for something to do and what direction I wanted to go in. Uh, at the time, I knew how to be a mechanic, work on stuff, work on engines, do paint work and stuff. I was getting into it, so I started customizing the bike.
Yeah.
My buddies,
Your own bike.
yeah, exactly. My buddies really liked what I was doing.
Yeah.
So pretty much as soon as I got into the riding scene, my buddy's like, "Hey, can you paint this? Can you paint this?" And one thing led to another. Rented a shop with a few buddies, and Right Side Up Creations was born.
Yeah. Okay. So when you first got into it, your big seller was your paint work, right?
Yes.
But you were doing other repairs and stuff, and you're a knowledgeable mechanic anyway. But
Yes.
really, at that point, that was the main focus of the shop.
Paint and bolt-on customs.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So what at the time? I mean, this is 05, early 2000s.
Yeah.
We're pretty much. I mean, me and you were friends back then. So, um, what kind of accessories were popular for guys to want to put on their bikes at that time?
It was mostly paint, LEDs, swing
Yeah,
arms,
LEDs. Yeah, okay.
and sending out stuff for chrome.
Gotcha. So you're
Yeah.
removing components, getting them sent
Like
out,
swing arms, wheels,
yeah,
levers,
wheels.
triples, all
Yeah,
that
that
kind of
makes
stuff.
sense. Yeah.
Yep. Polish
Yeah.
this, polish that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were not just doing like one solid color paint work. What were some of the stuff that was really selling good for you as far as like some of the effects you put in the paint and some of the different designs that you did?
We were doing a lot of House of Color candies. My own bike, my F4i, was my first marbleized paint job.
The green?
Everyone said it looked like a bowling ball. That caught a lot of attention at shows. And that was really, I'd bring that to a show. And after that show, I would have work for it pretty much lined up for weeks or months on end after every
Yeah.
show that we went to.
Yeah. And so pretty much just word of mouth at the time. I mean, even back then, like we were still kind of ahead of like all the social media promotions and stuff that people nowadays are taking advantage of. So really it was, you were out on your bike, people say, "Yo, that's sick. Can you do it to mine?" And you're just getting business through that way.
Absolutely. The only social media back then that I knew of, that we knew of, was probably MySpace.
It probably was. It probably was. It was probably just ending around that time, I think, or I really don't remember
right
for
in
sure.
there.
So, so really just being out and about and, being in the scene is really how we made money back then. And I was right there too. And I mean, if it was the local radio station had a cruise night or, you know what I mean? If anything was going on, we would be there. And if there was nothing going on, we would take advantage and we'd be riding down 240, down through Elkinville and hitting all these real nice, nice roads. Anybody that's up in New York area, 240 and 242, they kind of run from like Western New York and south. They're very well maintained roads, which makes them ideal to go way over the speed limit on. And of course, I would never recommend that, but they are in nice condition and there's a lot of nice curves on them.
You got to find those ski resort roads. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. So you're doing paint work. Oh, I got one on that. So one of my favorite, I'll try to bring it out of you, but if you don't remember, I'll say it. But every time you had someone working for you that was doing your prep work, okay? I remember I'd see them and they'd be sitting on a bucket just wet sanding and wet sand. And I'd be hanging around and we'd be chilling out and they would say, "Am I done yet?" Do you remember what you used to say back? Or because I do, if you know.
There was a saying, when I think you're done, you're only half done.
That's exactly it. And I tell my kids that to this day. They'll say, I'll be like, "Oh, you guys got to dust the living room," and they'll say, 3 seconds later, "Oh, are we done?" And I'm like, "No." I'm like, and in that case, they're not even half done. But yeah. I always remember you used to say that, and it's one of those like quotes that kind of just sticks with you in the career. You know what I mean? Like you hear people say a certain thing, and it kind of sticks with you, and it becomes part of your own quotes that you use. You know what I mean?
When we used to do aluminum polishing, I mean, we would polish. I didn't have fingerprints. It's just so much time sanding. And
right.
You'd get someone that came in that never did it before, and they'd be like, sand it for a few minutes. They think it's good, so we check it, and of course, it needed to go a lot further.
Yeah, and polished aluminum is something that once you send it out the door, you're not done, because unless you have some kind of protective coating, it's going to need to be redone pretty often.
It needs constant maintenance.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, do you still get into a lot of the cosmetic stuff or not so much anymore?
For the most part, no.
For the most part, no.
If
Maybe
someone
like a
buys,
job here or there.
yeah, if someone buys a new bike and they're coming here because we do performance work and they want to do some bolt-ons like fender delete stuff like that,
Yeah.
we get into doing appearance, or if they're doing carbon fiber body work, stuff
Right,
along those
right.
lines.
Okay.
But besides that, we are
Nothing shiny though, for the
primarily
most part.
performance based.
Yeah.
Yeah, no custom builds anymore.
Yeah. No, that's okay. I was just curious. Um, so at some point along the way, um, your shift focused more towards performance and stuff like that. So take me through kind of how that shift happened. I know part of it was that you kind of started getting into track riding yourself with a few friends. So let's kind of hear the evolution from basically, uh, custom paint, candy colors, marbleized, chrome wheels and all this stuff, 12 o'clock wheelies down the 190 for just miles and miles. So, so how did it come from that to basically track and sport?
So we got into doing more maintenance work. I mean, going back, we haven't talked about it yet, but our shop was together for a while.
Yeah.
And when I was doing paint work, you were doing a lot of maintenance and stuff out of there.
Yep.
And there was actually things that I would watch you do, like doing suspension work and stuff, and learned a lot of the basics from you.
Yeah.
Then after my move to Rochester, I started working at another shop, and I was the full on sport bike mechanic. So I was doing
Okay.
everything for a while, and then once around 2008, we did our first track day. 2009, we did a lot of track days. 2010, we started racing, and we were good at it.
Yeah.
So we needed bikes that could perform as well as we did.
So
We
for anybody that doesn't know, what is a track day? Because I realize that's not like a common thing for most motorcyclists to really even understand what it is.
So track day is becoming a lot more common than what it used to be.
Right, yeah.
But it's more or less you can take your street bike, doesn't matter what it is. Sport bike is always preferred that they're designed for it. All you have to do is tape up your headlights and stuff like that. Then you're ready to go to the track on it. It's a controlled environment.
Yeah.
You go there, a rookie would go there and you're following someone. It's follow leader for the first half of the day till you're comfortable. And then they set you free, but you're on a racetrack that sometimes, depending on what track you go to, it could be a national level racetrack. So
Sure.
it's completely unrestricted once you're set free. You can go as fast as you want to go, and a lot of people aren't as fast as they think they are.
I, there's a lot of times in life that people find out the hard way they're not as good as they think they are, and I've been in that situation where I find out that I'm not as good as I thought I was at something, and it is a humbling thing, but it's also good to really have a realistic, level that
It's
you're
a
at.
very humbling experience your first
Yeah.
track day.
So basically, you drop the racetrack a few bucks. They take you out, make sure you're at least not a safety hazard, and then they let you go free for the day. And then you can just rip around this track for however long the track day goes, as fast as you want.
More or less, they still have control riders out there to make sure you're being
Yeah,
safe.
sure.
So any new riders interested in going, there's should be no fear involved. That there's people that go and do track days before they ever ride on the street.
You're right. Yeah,
There's no issue with that whatsoever. It's probably the safest environment to go ride a motorcycle in.
right. Especially if you really want to open it up and
Yes,
really carry some corner speed and stuff.
absolutely.
So track days is more of like kind of like sport riding on a track as like a weekend warrior type of thing, right?
Yes.
So what's the next level to where you're actually doing like racing? Like what is there like club racing, like bar league kind of idea stuff, or is it you're in the big time as soon as you take that step?
So absolutely, there's club racing. We did more of that than we did pro events, although we did some of those and stuff too. But club racing still brings a lot of big names to it.
Sure, yeah.
And we were doing track days with our one buddy that had a few races under his belt, and he's like, "You guys are fast. You should come race."
Yeah.
And that's really what got us into racing. And myself, I was a top 5 finisher. Good friend of mine, teammate Bart DeRosa,
yeah.
he was a podium finisher right off the bat.
Right, yeah.
And starting the first year, we won a championship, and we won championships almost every year after that we were racing.
And that started in about 08 or 09 or something?
That was our first championship. Our first full season racing was 2010.
2010.
Yeah.
And at this point, you're full into it. You're
We're
every
full.
weekend or every other weekend. I mean, how many?
There was one race a month, but we were at the track probably every other weekend.
Okay, so there was one race a month that you had to get at just to be able to be in the season.
Yes.
Because anyone that you didn't show up, obviously you're not scoring points
Yeah,
towards the
you're
championship.
losing points. You're
So you're at
forfeiting.
least hitting the once a month for that season.
Yeah.
And then you're in between, you're working on your product, working on your skills and stuff, and trying to get faster.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so how far? So we're in Western New York. How far were you driving to be able to do this? Because I know some people are going across the country. Some people can probably just do it regionally.
So,
What was the case for you guys?
so our first season, we were leaving the country, but it was only about an hour away. We were racing right over the border in Canada.
Oh, in Canada.
Yeah.
Okay.
I ventured out and did a couple races in the U.S. that year. And the following season, 2011, that's when pretty much I brought the team over and we started doing mainly U.S. events and not so many Canadian events.
Yeah, okay.
We did some championship runs then with both Weira. I did some racing with CCS.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, cool. So you, Bart, how many guys did you have in your team that were actually running bikes?
So me, Bart, and Tim were pretty much, Tim Rendell were pretty much the original guys.
Yeah.
It changed throughout the years. We picked up sponsorship, we picked up some support,
Yep.
stuff like that. But me, Bart, and Tim, like if we were to go do an endurance race right now, us three would probably be on that team along with a few others.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
That's good, man. So are you still racing to this day, or are you mostly behind the scenes with the wrench in your hand?
Mostly with the wrench in my hand. I've done last year. I did some hare scrambles, which is dirt bike
Off-road,
riding.
yeah, okay.
Yep. Hating yourself in the woods. It's pretty much a battle of survival.
Yeah.
I won one of those races, finished fourth in just a local championship, nothing major.
Cool.
Year before that, I was doing a lot of supermoto, and that supermoto stuff is fun, but it doesn't cure the itch the way that road racing does. So I just got myself a new bike that I'm getting into, and hopefully hitting up some more tracks next year.
Okay, so even after all those years, after your doctor said that you would never ride again, and then you said, well, maybe I'll just do street because it might be a little bit less impact, and all these years later, now you're doing off-road again.
Yeah.
That's incredible, man. I love hearing stories like that because A, I don't really like doctors that much, and B, I always like seeing my homeboys kind of overcome something challenging, you know what I mean? Because I love seeing my boys win because that makes me want to win, you know, and it's like contagious.
It absolutely 100%. And for me, I realized if I stay active, I stay doing stuff, I'm better off in everyday activities. I'm better off in a day around the shop, stuff like that. It might hurt the day after, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
Especially nowadays, it's all part of getting older.
It is, and you kind of do have to listen to your body and just, you know, say, man, I better just take it easy today, or hey, today I'm feeling really good. Let's go.
Yep.
Ruin my back again or something, you know?
Yep.
So okay. So at this point, you're road racing, you're winning championships, stuff like that. Now, was the shop still going, or were you still working for somebody else at that time?
Shop was still going.
Okay.
It was.
And by now you had to move to Rochester, New York, right?
Yeah, I moved to Rochester, and I started my own shop again at the end of 2010. So pretty much
around
right after
the
our
same
first
time,
year, right at the end.
Cool.
And my motto for a few years there was pretty much work hard, play harder.
Yeah.
We were in the shop doing long days in the shop, sometimes leaving at 2 a.m., stuff like that, all during the week. Go to the track on the weekend, and it all paid off. It made it worth it. We were having fun at the track. We were going out there doing good racing, and more or less once you were on the road going to the track, it just paid off for all that time that you spent in the shop.
Yeah.
And we were doing everything then. My paint experience carried over, so we weren't just doing the engine, suspension, and everything, but we were doing the paint, everything in-house.
So you still presented a nice looking bike,
Yeah.
which is not required, but it really does go a long way. Because it's kind of how you present yourself. You
It
know,
helped us pick up sponsorship and stuff along the way.
Yeah,
so
I'm sure.
It's well worth it.
Yeah, it's always best to put your best like aesthetic forward, I think, even if you're just in a realm of performance. You know what I mean? Like there's some like gun YouTuber guy says, if you don't look cool, what's the point, or something like that. And I think that's right. You know what I mean? Because you could show up in something that just looked clapped out, but it could be mechanically perfect, and it could be the
And
fastest bike on the track.
there's some very fast guys that you'll see that they'll bring their bike in on a low budget trailer, bodywork that's been crashed on 20 times,
Yeah.
and they might kick your ass at the track that weekend. But
Yeah.
they're still not out there picking up sponsorship and
Right.
stuff like that.
Because they want to,
Yeah.
you know, if the sponsor's going to put their logo on your stuff, they want it to look good and presentable and professional.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. And actually, I really hadn't really considered that. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people just go to like the track with unpainted fairings that they bought on eBay or Amazon or whatever. And I guess it does the trick, right? But yeah, you're right. It doesn't put your best aesthetic forward, and it doesn't attract anybody that's got money.
Yeah.
And as we both know, you know, making money in the motorcycle industry is certainly a tricky thing where you got to find your own way. You know?
Yeah, I think we're all a little bit crazy for doing it. So
yeah, and I certainly never advise any young people to get into this industry, but tons of people advised me not to, and I didn't listen. So if the right young man comes along and I say definitely don't get into this career, he probably won't listen to me either. And then 20 years later, he hopefully will have found his way. You know?
If you're stubborn enough and you stick to it, then maybe it's for you. But you need to be stubborn. You need to be able to stick to it.
Yeah.
And you need to be willing to put in the hours.
Yeah, and you need to be realistic too, I think, you know, because you know, like, I mean, even just like guys that weld, I mean, like, you know, welding's a great talent and stuff like that. You can, you know, make twice what I make in a year. Just going out and just doing welding for somebody else. You know, a million careers that you could make $1 million if that's what you're after, you know. But usually guys that end up in the industry, they value their time on earth more so than the wealth they accumulate during it, you know. It's more about the experience and the memories than it is about the dollars in the bank and stuff like that, you know. Not that that hurts, you know, but
same way I see it. I mean, you spend most of your life at work, so why not try doing something you enjoy? It's a little cliche, and you got to bust ass to get there, and there's easy days and hard days.
Yeah,
but it's if you stick to it, it can pay off in the end.
Yeah, I think that's definitely 100% spot on. But we also do see guys from time to time that get into the industry and they do pretty well, but somehow along the way they lose their love and their joy in the sport. What tips would you have for anybody that wants to pursue their hobby as a career and they're afraid of losing the love for their hobby? Because it's a tricky line to walk.
Don't
do the career?
Don't do it.
Keep it as a hobby? Okay, that's fair. A little bit before the podcast, you know what I mean, we were talking about, you know, how difficult it is to kind of keep that alive. And, you know, for me, being able to work on my own bike is what brings me the most joy. And working on other people's bike, like I do enjoy doing a good job. I take pride in putting my name on a job. But as far as like, you know, if I just got time to kill and I want to enjoy it, you know, there's plenty of little things I could do on my bike that, you know, will kind of fulfill that for me.
Absolutely. I like finishing a project, and, you know, customer satisfaction is huge to me. So that's motivational, as well as, again, getting to go out and ride. So as long as I am riding, the years that I can ride a lot, put in time, makes it a lot easier. When I'm stuck in the shop all the time, I don't want to say that it's miserable, but it you know, the long days definitely get to you, for sure.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you know, you work, you know, a lot of guys think 40 hours a week is like a normal amount, and there's a lot of guys that work in shops that are working 60 hours a week. But when you do your own thing, people don't really get it, that you don't really clock out. You know,
your owner, operator.
You might be in the shop for 100 hours a week, and then you might spend another 20 hours doing paperwork. You know, or selling jobs, or talking to customers, and doing all that stuff. So, you know, there's a lot of people that, you know, say, "Oh, it must be nice," you know, and a lot of those people wouldn't be able to hack it. Unfortunately,
they don't see behind the scenes. They wouldn't be able to.
You have to really discipline yourself to be able to continue to do this, because you know, it's nice to just show up and do the bare minimum every day and get that check at the end of the week. But when you work for yourself, that's not the way it goes, you know. So, and another thing too, like you said, you know, I said, "Oh, do you still racing?" You said, "Yeah, I'm doing hair scrambles." You know, so sometimes you have to put a different spin on it, you know, like maybe, you know, you're building race bikes, you know, 80 hours a week. Maybe you don't really want to be on one all weekend, you know, so you're out in the woods doing your hair scrambles and stuff. And I think that's a good point too. Is that there's so many different angles you can go in this industry, and it's like once you know one part of it, you kind of are familiar with the rest of it and kind of fit right in.
Yeah, even though I mean you're talking opposite ends of the spectrum. You're on a race bike, you're going as fast as you can go, which is usually speeds well over 120 miles an hour on average on the
Yeah.
racetrack. Where a hare scramble, your average speed might be 8 miles an hour
Right.
sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's two completely different things, but at the same time, it still relates and it still gives you that same satisfaction when you
Yeah.
finish the race.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. That's super cool. So at this point, you have pretty much evolved your business to the point where you are still, you said, doing some maintenance and stuff like that, but you really are kind of like honed in on your wheelhouse right now, and you're really mostly doing sport bikes.
Yes.
So on an average day around here, what kind of jobs do you have in here? So that way anybody listening might know, like, when is the right time to call Matt Zimmerman for some work?
So
Because some people, somebody calls you up, there's a lot of jobs you're not looking for. You're really
it,
only doing a certain type of work these days.
exactly. So throughout the summertime, we'll do anything from dyno tuning, bolt-ons like exhaust work, intake work, pretty much any bolt-on performance stuff, as well as a lot of suspension and chassis stuff too. We work on race bikes throughout the season. I work with racers, so we do get into doing engines throughout the summertime and stuff.
For somebody who
Uh,
needs one for racing,
yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
because they can't really wait,
Because
right?
we work with teams, so
Yeah.
we'll have those regular customers. But now for the non-race teams, typically because we're in New York and we're very seasonal up here,
Very
so
seasonal.
yeah,
There's like 20 out right now.
yeah. So we get into we try setting up most of our big jobs, our engine builds and everything throughout the winter time, and throughout the summer we're on the dyno probably 5 days a week.
No kidding.
Yes.
So when you're on the dyno, you're mostly looking. What kind of percentage are you looking to get for gains for your average guy that comes in and just wants a tune?
It really, really depends. Some bikes, before restrictions took place, sometimes you're only gaining 3 to 5% horsepower.
Yeah.
But we're not your typical dyno shop. We're not just going for top end horsepower. We go for rideability. Almost every bike that's on the dyno is up there for at least 2 hours.
Really?
We start building the map all the way down at idle. We do every throttle position, both on the gas, off the gas.
Yeah.
So we're riding your bike on the dyno and trying to get it to run smooth and make the best performance everywhere.
So you're
It,
not just looking for that big number.
we're not just getting a peak
I mean,
number.
it's nice to look at, I'm sure, but you're really
It,
looking for smooth power.
it absolutely.
Yeah.
But when it comes to turning and tracks, doesn't matter if it's dirt track, doesn't matter if it's motocross, doesn't matter if it's super bikes.
Yeah.
That peak number isn't going to always equate to a fast lap time.
Right. And really corner speed is the key. And smooth, predictable power is how you keep
100%.
this corner speed. Yeah. So that makes sense. So really at the end of the day, somebody's laying their bike over to these extreme lean angles and now they need to get back on the throttle. They don't want something that's going to just come on all at once. They want something that's going to really come on predictably.
You don't want it to come on at once, but you also don't want a flat spot there either.
Right, exactly.
Anything that's going to destabilize the chassis, destabilize your traction, the smoother it is, the better you're going to get the power to the ground, which is really what matters for your lap time.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So you're during the summer, you said, you'll do some engines for guys who are racing because obviously they're in the middle of their season, they need an engine done. And then doing some performance stuff and any general maintenance or anything like that?
So most of our good customers that we have around here, when I say good customers, I just mean regular customers.
Yeah.
Got guys that we know well, come into the shop. We do all their maintenance, or if we do a full build on something, we do full maintenance on it. But sometimes it gets to the point where we get busy enough to the point where we need to turn away work, even if it's stuff that we normally work on.
Right.
But we try to take care of basic stuff like gearing, brakes, oil, basic suspension service like fork seals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
All season long, as long as it's a late model sport bike or even a moto bike. It typically, if it's metric, we'll take it in.
Okay. So what's late model? 10 years, 20 years? What do you think?
If it's not fuel injected, we're probably going to send you somewhere else.
No, send it to me. I love carburetors.
But most of the bikes we take in now are 2010 and newer, but we do get into some early 2000s bikes as well.
Right. So for instance, like the fuel injection rule, so you might take in like an 04 600 RR, You
It
might take in like an
if
06 R6 or
it
something.
if it's been well maintained. If there's bikes out there, I mean, we know how many bikes have been
uh,
molested out there. So
yeah,
we don't like taking in a project that's been through so many people's hands and
no,
hey,
I
this
get
has
that.
been done,
Yeah,
this has been done. And the main reason why is when something leaves here, we want it done right. So you get into a bike like that, you're going to be more into doing repairs and making it right than just starting with a different bike. And we don't want to go and someone's like, hey, let's dyno tune this, but the bike needs $3,000 in maintenance, which is
right.
very possible when you get
Yeah.
into it.
Right. I mean, and I've had the same thing kind of happen at my place where somebody says, hey, I want to do this or that. And it's really not something the bike needs. It's something the client wants. And then I get the bike in and the fork seals are leaking and the brakes are metal on metal. And, it's just the whole thing's a mess. And, I'll take care of that stuff, and it's like, I guess it depends on the client because some of my clients really do really good maintenance on their own and take care of their own stuff very well and just kind of come to me to fill the gaps and stuff they don't want to get into. Um, but yeah, there is really something about, it's nice to make the money, but at the same time, you send them out and you only fix one thing on the bike and the rest of it don't look so good. You're still the last guy that worked on it. So
Exactly.
they see someone at a cruise night, yeah, I take it over to Matt at right side up, and meanwhile there's 10,000 safety hazards on the thing. That's not really a good look, unfortunately. And sometimes when I get a customer who I think has really good intentions, maybe just needs a little bit of education, I'll kind of say, hey, listen, here's the thing: is that there's all these red flags on your bike. I said, unless we're going to take care of all of these, I don't want any interest in it. And usually I'll try to work out some kind of like nice deal just to get them like squared away enough to where we're at a fresh starting point.
That's the same
And then
approach.
I'm happy to work
Yep,
on the bike all the time.
absolutely. That's the same approach I'll take, and
Yeah, good.
I'll kind of feel them out on it. If they're interested in fixing everything right because they didn't know better,
Yeah,
we're more than likely we're going to take it on, and
right.
we'll work with them and go through it. If someone's like, no, I just want to do this, I mean, I'm as honest and as straightforward as it gets. We're probably going to turn you away.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's hard to turn down a job sometimes. So you got to think about the big picture, And I mean, you've been doing this 20 years. Kind of like we mentioned, I tried my own shop when I first got in the industry, 06, '07, and I wasn't responsible enough at the time to where I wasn't just making money during the day and spending it at night at the bar or something like that, And
Many of
I ended up
those.
working for somebody else again, for the last 15 well, actually, yeah, probably more like almost 20 years, and now I've been on my own for almost three. So hopefully, now
I,
I've reached maturity to where I can keep it going. But
Absolutely. I hope you get that building built so I can come down check it out, and
yeah, I got a small building now. You can come check
uh,
out anytime.
I'll make it down there.
Yeah, sometimes they even have bourbon in there.
Oh shit.
The so for your average guy who's maybe got a late model sport bike, so maybe they've got like something 5 or 10 years old, pretty clean. Let's just say it's all stock, okay?
Yep.
And they come in and they say, "Hey, my budget is 2 grand, and I want to put it all into shit that will help me ride faster, just generally." What are you going to kind of point them towards?
Are they looking to make the bike faster, like as far as
Yeah, because
horsepower goes,
people
or
never
to
want
make
to get faster. You know that. The bike is the one that's supposed to get
so
faster.
if the bike's stock and they're looking to make
Yeah, completely stock bike, couple years old. They got about 3 grand that they want to put into just performance, not just engine performance, not just suspension. Where would you put the money? Brakes, tires, suspension, engine.
I
Just
would
any kind of rough idea is good.
I would try to balance it out the best that we can. It really depends on the model. Some models that sell and
Okay.
they have good performance out of the box. So it's like, hey, we can get away with throwing a half exhaust on this,
Yeah.
which is cheaper than doing a full system.
Sure.
We throw a tune on it. There's the engine. That's where you spring the suspension for your weight,
Yep.
and throw maybe lightweight gearing and upgraded brake pads on it. We can stay in your budget. Some models are really capped from the factory. They're going to need that full exhaust. They're going to need that,
Right. Okay.
and you really got to pick and choose what mods you're going to do because you're either going to add more power or you're going to improve the chassis.
Right. 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 So what nowadays, what kind of full system do you like to sell? You don't have to drop a name, but give me an idea of like what someone's going to spend on a full system that you think is a good product.
So full systems, you don't need a titanium system unless you're looking to save every
The
gram off the
weight.
bike,
Yeah.
or you want the nice look of a titanium system. So you could save your money. You don't need the titanium system.
Okay.
Uh, but there's a lot of good manufacturers out there. Mainly, don't go after sound based. We go after performance based. We like manufacturers that
Right.
build their systems on a dyno,
Yeah.
which there's a lot of companies out there that do it.
Sure.
Some companies like to build their system on something that sounds good and what they think looks good.
Right. Right.
But when it comes to performance, those aren't systems. We typically won't even set up as a dealer with a lot of those companies.
Because they're more of
Um,
like an aesthetic and sound
It it
thing.
exactly. So
Yeah.
again, it goes
A
to
lot of
like
times you could put a performance exhaust on. Well,
it,
performance in air quotes, okay? Because a lot of times you can put an exhaust on something and you can do worse than your factory
it
exhaust.
you can
Unfortunately, it's crazy to think, but it happens.
it's not as common as it used to be because nowadays stock exhausts are so restricted.
Yeah. Okay.
So almost any exhaust you'll probably see some gains from it,
Yeah.
but you might lose mid range. You might not get that throttle response you want, no matter what tune you put on it. So
Right. Okay.
it really does depend. Every model is so different than one another.
Yeah.
It's incredible almost how far apart some of them are.
So what's an average full system nowadays? Because I remember, and I do work on a couple sport bikes here and there, and I do have a huge love. Part of my heart is owed to sport bikes, but just getting older, I've got no business on them. I'm gonna open the throttle. I just it's I wouldn't be here today if I didn't stop riding sport bikes. But I remember when, like for instance, like Acro was coming around, like they were charging 3, 4 times what even like Yosh was. Like so for a good full system nowadays, what's like a ballpark? 1,500, two
So
grand, 2,500. I mean,
about an hour before you got here, I sold a full system for a ZX6R
okay,
for that retails for $1,200,
that seems
and
reasonable.
it's
Okay,
one of the best power making full systems that we've seen for a ZX6.
just all go,
But
no show,
in
right?
our exactly in
Yeah.
our experience, still had a carbon can.
Okay.
Uh, but there's some systems out there. Again, it depends on the model because of supply and demand. Specifically, some of the KTM stuff, some of the BMW stuff. You get into Acura systems, and they're well over $3,000. They can go
I
up to
know.
four
Yeah.
thousand or even more.
Yeah.
A lot of those are again titanium builds, and you don't need it. Uh, but there's even on that ZX6R, going back to that, there's a $1,200 system, or you could go with another manufacturer that makes a system might perform slightly better, but the exhaust is 3 times the price.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because at the end of the day, like your average guy that's riding, I mean, horsepower is nice and horsepower costs money, but you know what I mean. You got to find your way to make it happen. And, chop what they got. You say, you know what I mean. Like,
it,
so if you got 2 grand or whatever, if you got twelve
it
hundred to buy an exhaust and you don't have
you,
3 grand, then
you're,
guess what? Your bike's still gonna be faster buying that
you'll
one.
be better off going with brand A full system instead
Yeah.
of brand B, the more expensive brand slip on, because you'll still be doing a
Yeah.
full system on it.
Yeah. And nowadays, like with fuel injection, um, when you go in and you go on the dyno, you're actually modifying the stock ECU, or are you installing a piggyback, or both? Or a piggyback, for anybody listening who doesn't know, it's something that goes in between the computer and the injectors that can manipulate the fuel flow at the injectors. Power Commander is a very popular brand. There's others, of course, as well. But lately, a lot of people are able to burn the ECU. So that's what I'm talking about here.
Most of the bikes we get into, we have the software and the interface where we get in and we change ECU settings, and it's not just what it used to be. Where Power Commanders, I love Power Commanders. My own race
Yeah,
bike
myself
runs a
too.
Power
Yeah.
Commander. The main thing is on a dyno on a Power Commander, I can do live tuning. I'm tuning while the bike's running,
Okay.
so we can do better fine tuning with a
Ah,
controller
okay.
like that. But for most street bikes or basic bikes, we can go through the ECU and get all the settings we want. First off, we get rid of any restrictions that the factory puts in there.
Okay.
And then we can modify ignition, we can modify fueling, we can modify throttle mapping, which is huge.
Yeah, all through that same program?
All through the same
Okay.
program. Almost everything's electronic throttle valve. So
Yeah,
again, we want it to be smooth.
right.
So we spend a lot of time working on every ECU that we do, and get the electronic throttle mapping down. There's other stuff. There's intake flaps in these bikes now, so we modify whether we disable that completely or when we want that to open. again, it depends on the purpose of the bike as well, because
Yeah.
some bikes we're restricted on, where some bikes are like a full on race bike. We can do whatever we want with it.
Yeah. Now those flaps and the exhaust or the intake and the airbox and stuff like that. Now that's basically what it's doing is it's trying to like choke it at low RPM, right, to create like more pressure,
That's
to give you like more low end power. Or am I wrong there?
that was how they were originally designed,
Okay.
but nowadays it's more or less all about sound. The intake flaps are 100% to reduce intake noise.
Ah,
I've never seen
I like
more.
intake noise.
Me too. I've never seen more velocity from an intake flap.
Okay.
I've never seen power gains from it. So
Yeah.
again, that's usually something.
Huh.
As long as it's an off-road motorcycle, track bike, or something, we usually disable it or remove it completely.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we see performance throughout doing stuff like that,
Sure.
especially down low where those flaps are normally closed.
Right. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
same thing with the exhaust valves. That they're 90% sound
Okay.
as far as they go.
Huh. I always thought, I guess I never would have guessed that. A, because I think intake noise sounds cool. And B, I know that the more restriction you have in the intake, the more your power band kind of shifts to the low end and the less restriction and wide open. If you got, for instance, like velocity stacks or something, usually you're going to lose a ton of low end power and gain about a lot on top. But with what you're doing, you're not really ever getting rid of air boxes, right?
No, we're not really getting rid of air
Yeah.
boxes because again, that the peak number. I mean, even on most sport bikes, because of the heat of the engine and everything, you still want an air box. You want the air coming from the front of the bike to the bike,
Oh, instead of pulling like the
compared to
air
an
that's
air
hanging
cooled bike
around.
that has the
Yeah.
pod filters behind the engine.
Yep.
But we're looking for power throughout, so we typically stay with the stock air box. Some of them we modify the air boxes.
Okay.
A lot
Depending
of
on the model.
it, yep.
Yeah.
Depending on the model, some bikes benefit from velocity stacks. Some bikes, again, like you're saying, will lose power from velocity
Okay.
stacks, especially mid range power. So if you're losing 3-4 foot-pounds of torque, it's not worth gaining 1 or 2 horsepower from stacks, and that's all that you're going after is top speed.
Right. So if you're drag racing, that's an easy decision to make. But if you want that low end coming out of a corner, you got to put some thought into it.
Exactly.
Yeah. I remember like, and a lot of people generally think that just opening up intake and exhaust is going to just somehow give you all power gains and no downsides at all. And obviously, we all know that the factory builds things for a reason, and they don't, really screw around too much. But I remember back in the day, back to those mid early 2000s, we used to do like Sunday morning, like MotoGP parties, and we would sit around and drink some coffee, and
Yeah.
we'd sit there and watch the race because MotoGP is a worldwide event, so it wasn't always on at prime time.
Yep.
And we'd be sitting there on a Sunday morning watching the race or whatever, and you'd see these things without like their, I guess it wasn't really the gas tank; it was just like some kind of shell that went over the airbox, and you'd see the size of these airboxes on these MotoGP bikes, and this is years ago, and at that point, it's like that airbox is an important thing. I mean, I don't have one. I want to see my filters. Half of my bike is built for aesthetic. My bike is a hot rod, is what I call it. Because
Right.
it's a little bit faster than stock, looks a little bit cooler than stock, but I can still daily drive it and stuff. Um, but yeah, I guess a lot of people don't really get like airbox like tuning has a lot to do with like vibrations, pressure, the amount of air that can come into the intakes and stuff like that. And there's definitely a lot more science behind it than I know about for sure.
Yeah, you want to keep that air velocity there, without ever having any flat spots due to pretty much not having the velocity. So
Yeah,
it's about keeping that constant velocity, but at the same time, it's hard to have that velocity without and not sacrificing the top end flow. So that's why there's
right.
so much time and development that goes into
Yeah,
air boxes, velocity stacks, stuff like that, because it needs to flow top end. But same thing with porting ahead. You can't just make your ports big. You lose velocity, you're going to
yeah.
lose your atomization, so you're going to lose your mid range power.
Yeah. So on the intake side, generally, whether it's in the airbox or in the cylinder head, usually you would want like the air to be more turbulent. You say that's accurate to, they say that it affects like the temperature of the intake charge if the air is kind of swirling around a little bit instead of just coming in as fast as it can.
So with fuel injection, it's you want the speed, you want the velocity once it's into the port.
Okay.
In the airbox design, I mean, we don't build airboxes here, so
Right.
we do want them to flow as less restrictive as possible, of
Okay.
course.
So with
So
fuel injection, you can just take as much air as you can
it,
get, and you can tune it to where it's going to be
it
money.
yes,
Okay.
with the airbox,
Right.
but
Right. Right.
not
Yeah.
with your ports because
Yeah.
you start opening up the ports so much, you're going to lose your velocity down low.
Yeah. Okay.
So with porting, it's not like it used to be with the carburetor bikes. Carburetor bikes used to have to do different textured finishes, stuff like that, to
Yeah.
try different atomization. Now it's all about watching the right velocity. So
Right. Okay.
if you're porting ahead and you have it on flow bench, again, the biggest number doesn't always win.
Right. Okay. And I mean, I'm not. I don't want to give away your proprietary secrets because obviously you've got a ton of years into kind of developing your own style of how you make things fast. Um, but when you're putting like an engine together, if someone says, "Hey, let's just say the guy wants to go out," because obviously there's guys that are on different budgets. Let's say a guy comes in, he's got a late model, let's say like a 600 or something like that, and he says, "I want you to build this engine for race," and he says, "I don't care if it lasts one weekend." You know what I mean? What are the main things that you're looking to modify? Because these things are so fast from the factory now. And I mean, the bikes that are coming out like these new like ZX 400s, you know what I mean? Like these Ninja 400s are four cylinders, and they're probably faster than anything we rode back in the day. You know, but if you're just strictly talking about the motor, are you going into the crank? Are you just going into the cylinders and the heads? And I know that a lot of it depends on probably what class you're racing
It
because there's different
it
rules.
depends on rules. It is a big part. Budget is another big part. So you're going to get more horsepower per dollar out of bolt-on and head work. So pretty
Okay.
much when you're done with bolt-ons, we get into doing head work and or cams, depending on the model, stuff like that.
Okay.
And then if the budget allows, or if there's time on the engine, or if the rules allow, and we're just going as big as we can, we're usually going to get into the bottom end. There are small things that you can do to the crank to make more power. You're going to want to upgrade the rods to be able to handle more power
Sure.
if you're
Yeah.
adding a lot, or if you're doing a power add or something like
Yeah.
that. Then, of course, there's power to be made on pistons. But again, as soon as you want to do one bolt on that bottom end, now you're looking at replacing every bearing, almost every bolt on the
Yeah.
bottom end. So your dollars almost double right away. So a lot of
Yeah.
people will come in and we'll just do a top end job for them. That's one of the big packages that we do. We go in, we do head work, some models we do cams, and then we send it out fully dyno tuned, ready to go.
Yeah. Okay. So for bolt-ons, you mean like exhaust? What other like bolt performance
It,
bolt-ons are you
exhaust
thinking?
and other stuff that we talked about, pretty much the intake. Some bikes will have different electronic dongle bolt-ons
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
Okay.
But for the most part, it's exhaust and a freer flowing air filter
Yeah.
and any intake mods, depending on how restricted it is.
Depending on the model, because you said some benefit from mods and some you just leave factory,
It,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And then from the after that, cylinder head.
Yes.
So for a four-cylinder modern sport bike, if someone just mailed you a cylinder head and said make this thing nasty, what are you putting into it, and what's it going to cost for a job like that?
Usually it will get milled. We'll do a valve job,
Seal deck it.
and then it'll get ported. Yeah.
Okay,
Uh,
so for anybody listening, milling is basically where you reduce the height of the cylinder head on the cylinder side, and what it does is it makes the combustion area smaller, which raises your compression ratio to make more power. So you're milling the head and decking it, and then
and
you're porting and polishing. You
and
said.
then the valve job. So the machine shop that we use does a new one valve job on it.
Yep.
And we send them new valves when we do that. So it's a perfectly matched valve seat to that, which helps with combustion chamber sealing pressure
Yeah.
equals horsepower.
Right.
So
So they're cutting new seats on a
we
machine. They're not just relapping the valves.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Most valves nowadays are titanium valves.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to lap them at all.
Okay.
But
Gotcha.
a
Gotcha.
titanium valve is coated, so once you lap it, it's pretty much shot. You
Gotcha.
take
That
that
makes
coating
sense.
off
Yeah.
there. So we'll do that. Some of that stuff we're still subbing out at the machine shop. We're working on getting
Yeah.
our own equipment for doing it.
Okay.
That then we put our porting on it, and then we have a lot of models we know, so we know what cams work with what porting.
Right.
We usually ask what's going on with that build before we do it.
What the purpose of the bike is?
Again,
Yeah.
because port size is going to matter for what you're doing, for what purpose. Are you doing anything with the bottom end? Is it a stock bottom end? What
Yeah.
exhaust are you running? and we can kind of do everything with the ports and the head to make it match everything else.
Yeah.
So a head job when getting into the engine, that's where most of your power is going to be made.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And honestly, when I was when I sat down with Paul Gass, the motor that's in my bike, the KZ1000J motor, one of his most familiar motors from over the years that he's built into drag race bikes for people. And so basically, the difference between my bike, which has a big bore kit and has ignition and all this stuff on it, has some porting and stuff like that. Okay, the difference between my bike and my bike, if it had one of his heads, okay, is about 30 horsepower probably.
Yeah.
With his heads with cams.
Yeah,
Cams
he's
included in the head job. So
there's no one better than in the industry than that guy right there.
I mean, in his
For
wheelhouse, he's the king.
yeah,
You know what I mean? He doesn't
for models that
really
he knows.
he doesn't really
Like
get into road racing stuff. He will do like a road
he,
racing cut on a transmission.
I was just gonna say
Um,
that. So we send transmission work to Paul,
yeah,
and I
he
talked
still
to
cuts it himself.
I talked to him on the phone. He does a lot of himself.
Yeah,
I think he only has one or two people over there.
yeah, I think
Uh,
that's about right. Yeah,
and yeah, for road racing stuff, we'll send it out. We'll do undercut, and we'll actually undercut for downshifts too, for less
yeah,
missed
both
shifts and
ways.
stuff like
Yeah,
that.
that's how I
So
got mine done too. Yeah,
okay, sweet. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, bar none. I
yeah.
highly recommend them for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so as far as like if you get like a modern liquid cooled 600 cylinder head and you're gonna port it, polish, send it out for the new valves and stuff like that, and put some cams in it, and you're not installing on the bike. We're just talking about just building the head and mailing it back to the guy. What are you looking at? Like 3 or 4 grand, probably, right?
Without cams, going into a full head, you're probably going to be you'll be right between that $1,500 $2,000 mark if you don't need new seats, if you don't need new guides. That can
Okay,
bring it up a little bit over two
sure, because of
thousand.
machine work. Yeah,
Yep. But yeah, you can add cams, and if you're doing cams with valve springs and you're doing new valves and stuff, you can easily go over 5,000.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And the valve springs are
It,
just they're just so expensive, and nobody will ever see them.
for
That's why.
example, a lot of OEM Yamaha stuff. There's not many aftermarket options for them. You're going with OEM
Okay,
Yamaha valves. So,
yeah.
for an example, we have this R6 right here. Valves for that thing are over $2,000 just for
Just
the
for new
valves.
and they're
Yeah,
from Yamaha or they're aftermarket?
that they're about $120 to $130 a piece stock,
Oh,
and then valve springs are about $100 a piece.
yeah, okay. And then
So it
is
adds up.
everybody pretty much doing 16 valve again, or is Yamaha still doing their
There's
16 plus 4
there's
or 20 valve?
any inline four stuff that we're doing is all 16 valve.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. For anybody listening that doesn't get the inside joke, Yamaha, nobody can knock how good they are at building something, uh, but they are known for basically coming out with this new proprietary stuff and saying that it's going to be the next big thing, and then later they go back to what everybody else has been doing the whole time. So for a while, my bike, from the early '80s, is a 8 valve, meaning it's a 4 cylinder, one intake valve, one exhaust valve per cylinder. Eventually, everybody went to a 4 valve where there's 2 intake, 2 exhaust per cylinder. Yamaha went to a 5 valve, and the fifth one was an extra intake, right? Or
It was an extra intake.
yeah,
They downsized the size of the intake valves
to make them
because again,
smaller,
they were trying to get that velocity
trying
going.
to get some
Yeah,
kind of different
they
airflow or
they
pressure.
they,
Yeah,
they wanted that velocity down low while not sacrificing airflow up top.
yeah.
And it wasn't a terrible design by any means,
So
but
it's cool somebody tried it.
it wasn't the best because, as you know, they
Went
aren't
right
doing it
back.
anymore.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. But yeah, I guess at least they tried. So so what bikes do you currently own besides the F4i?
Currently, I have my F4i 09 600RR,
Okay.
16 R6, 17 CRF 450,
Okay.
94 CR 125,
Okay.
and a 2001 CRF 100.
Okay. So half dirt.
Yep.
And then so what year was the 600RR?
09.
Okay. What is that bike? A track bike only,
So
or is it?
that's a track bike. I've owned that bike since 2010. That's a
Okay.
bike I actually did the majority of my racing on.
Yeah. Cool.
We just recently refreshed the head on that one,
Okay.
and I'm moving on to the Yamaha for the track stuff.
Yeah.
And that CBR will probably be leaving the stable soon.
So you ride a Yamaha now?
I'm going to be on the Yamaha, dude. I mean, we've done a lot of development with riders on the R6s, of course. They're the most common track bike out there.
I'm sure.
But I'm going to do some of my own development and have some of my own fun on it, of course, and maybe find a rider for it, or just move on to the next thing after that. But it was ready for a change.
Yeah, good, cool. Yeah, R6. I remember our friend Bart had one first year it came out, and that was when the red line gate or whatever, where they advertised this huge red line.
They lied about that red line. They said it was 16,000 RPM.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, the tech.
And they ended up Yamaha offered to either change the tack faceplate so that it had the new, more accurate red line.
Yep.
And I think that they actually offered to buy some bikes back because of how much of a controversy it was.
Possibly, I didn't follow it much back then.
Yeah. Sick, dude. So if anybody wants to learn more about your shop, do you have a website or social media, or where's the best place for people to go? And whatever he says here in this answer, it's going to be down in the description of the podcast so that you can just with one clink, go check out Matt and hopefully not end up in the clink with a really fast bike and getting arrested.
So our website is under development right now. We're working on doing a new website. It's at rsumoto.com.
rsumoto.com. Okay,
yep.
Easy.
Facebook /Right Side Up Kreations.
Okay.
And Instagram at rsumoto.
Okay.
We don't always update our social media. Again, we're very busy in the shop. We're limited staff here.
Yeah.
But if you need to get a hold of us, that's the best way. Or if you want to look into our resources and stuff, that's the best thing to check out.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And so where do you see yourself going from here? I mean, are you pretty much staying the course? You're right where you want to be. You just want to kind of keep getting better at doing this.
I love building performance stuff. So there's no changes coming. It's going to keep developing stuff. And when new models come out, we spend our time and we learn the new models and get into them.
Yeah, cool, man. Well, I really appreciate you as a person because you've been around, for most of my time in the industry, and I really appreciate you sitting down with me today. Everybody that tuned in, the first 6 episodes of Motorcycle Transmissions are available on YouTube and Spotify. Matt, you want to say goodbye to everybody listening?
Guys, thank you for listening. Hope you guys check out the rest of Tom's podcast here. I've known this dude forever. Great people.
Sick. All right, everybody. Until next time, enjoy the miles.